Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, bringing you what is often my biggest video each season. That, of course, the jump-in tier list. We were delayed a little bit. Information didn't flow from Wizards of the Coast quite the way we expected, so we're about 15 hours behind where we wanted to be here, but nonetheless, we got it for you today. We got all the deck pack options evaluated from the rares, how well they synergize with existing decks, how well they create new decks, help you bridge into new formats, etc., etc., etc. The one thing to keep in mind here is these evaluations are not about the packs that are going to make it easy for you to win the jump-in event, because, well, that's not what jump-in's about. It is about being the most hyper-efficient way to add cards to your collection, and that is our focus today, as always. This season, I'm hanging out with the friends here in Bloomburrow, and, well, I don't really look any different. Apparently, I'm always in beast mode. And if you want your Magic the Gathering experience on and off Arena to be in beast mode too, make sure to check out my Patreon page, because let's be honest, not everything makes it to YouTube. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. The entire concept of jump-in is to take all the difficulty out of deck building. And really, it couldn't be much simpler because you're just making two choices. Your first choice, you're going to be shown three packs or mini decks. And with that, you're going to be given an image that is a little bit of a clue, a name, which is generally your biggest clue as to what the theme of the deck is. And of course, there's always an indication of the color associated with that pack. And all you do, if you scroll over each of the decks, it will also show you a key card to show you a little bit more mechanically what is going on thematically with that deck. And all you do is click on the one that you want, and then down in the bottom right hand corner you hit confirm pack to lock in that first choice. At that point, the screen updates and it shows you whatever your first choice was on the very far left-hand side of the screen, and then it's going to present to you three additional choices, the idea here being just the same. You get the same context clues, and you click on and confirm pick for your second choice. At that point, the decks are going to shuffle together. Some fairly appropriate land is going to be added, although honestly the land algorithm that they use is not always awesome. And at that point, you have a playable deck for the event. The renewal and rotation period has always been a little bit of a cleanup time within this hobby. And if you have been around the jump-in and my tier list before, there are a few things that you're going to notice that are different. First off, a lot of options have been removed, specifically the Dominaria United, Brothers War, Phyrexia All-Will-Be-One, and March of the Machine. All of those jump-in packs have been removed. And of course, let's not forget, Lord of the Rings as well is no longer expected to be an option within jump-in for this year. Then all of the remaining 42 packs from prior years need to be reevaluated, primarily for the way they interact with today's evolving meta, as well as how they support or are supported by the current year's starter deck collection. When I'm doing evaluations, I like to use what I lovingly refer to as the Eastwood rating system, breaking your choices down into three easy categories: the good, the bad, and the ugly. In order for a choice to get a rating of good, it's got to be above the moving average of all of the available choices. The bad, however, is actually still generally a playable option, so to speak. being within 1 standard deviation mathematically of having been a good choice. The ugly, however, is everything else that is left. It's not good. It's not even bad. These are the ugly choices that generally aren't even worth our time. All right, so what do you say we start the evaluation conversation off on the ugly portion? Normally, we expect any given jump-in pool to be somewhere between 33 and 50% ugly decks. And this early in the season, that number can swing pretty wildly. The good news is this time around, it swung very positively. In fact, less than 29% of this pool has received a score of ugly given its contents and the current meta conditions. A lot of that has to do with getting rid of those old packs that are no longer in standard, as well as the fact that Bloomburrow brought very high scores this time around. In fact, the Bloomburrow changes or additions to the jump-in pool raised the average deck score by nearly 17%. And in fact, the only ugly score that was given this season was for the Frogs deck. Unfortunately, the rares are not really that great. It's a very unsupported archetype in the current meta. It's kind of introducing a new thing in Simic Blink strategies. The commons and uncommons that are in the pack are really at their best in this style of deck, so you don't really pick up much value as far as cards you can use in other packs. And sadly, the deck doesn't really do any better in any other formats either. So all in all, the Frogs got a 1.5 as a score, and the next lowest for Bloomburrow was actually 4.2. So this one pack is a significant outlier thus far. What do you say we shift gears now and talk about those really good decks here within Jump-In, those ones that you really want to keep an eye out for? From prior year, Dinosaurs, Battalion, Frontier, and Prehistoric are all in the limelight, with scores in some cases more than double the average, and all of these in the good section are more than 1 standard deviation above average. From the Bloomburrow editions, rabbits and mice seem to be the forerunners, so definitely be on the lookout for those. Mice got a score of 8, which again is double the average deck score, and rabbits came up with a more than respectable 7.2. Also noteworthy, rats and mounts are still in the good category, but trailing a little further down. Mostly these are here for interactions with those starter decks, and of course Rats has a lot of potential in the meta moving forward. It's also important to note there are now 2 packets named Rats within the jump-in pool. One is mono black from the Wilds of Eldraine. The other also a mono black pack from the current Bloomburrow offerings. So if you see Rats being offered to you, make sure to hover over that card and see if it's showing you a card from Wilds of Eldraine or from Bloomburrow. Rats from Wilds of Eldraine did get a good score. Rats from Bloomburrow is more of a fringe tier 2 with a 5.7. Still pretty respectable, but in that tier 2 category. And speaking of tier 2, let's go ahead and knock those out. Of course, there's almost 56% of the decks falling into this category, so I'm not going to take the time to go through every single one. But some of the highlights, Detectives and Outlaws both have fairly high and respectable scores for obvious synergies with those starter decks, and honestly, it wouldn't take much to push these up into that good category. As I mentioned earlier, Exploring from the Bloomburrow editions, also very close to the fringe there. I think it was like half a point off from making the good tier. Slightly below that, Fairies, Casting, Hungry, Graveyard, Bittersweet, and Scrappy are all worth keeping an eye on. They all synergize pretty well with one or more of these starter deck offerings, so you do get more potential value out of those. Scrappy, I would note, however, is actually on the fringe of being an ugly deck, mostly because that starter deck isn't particularly good in my opinion. So there it is, guys. Those are my thoughts on the current jump-in offerings. I do think this is an incredibly good format, particularly for newer players. But of course, for the first week to 2 weeks of any new set, it serves its purpose for everyone. And that is getting cards into your collection at really a hyper speed. I know I went through it a little bit fast. Part of that is time crunch, and well, there's only so much I can say about these. But Matt would want you to know that if you follow the link down in the doobly-doo, it'll take you to my tier list spreadsheet that I continuously update throughout the season. You can even save your own copy to it in case you disagree with me. You can also use that copy to track when you have selected these things, how many of the individual rares that you have, etc., etc. And hey, even if you don't like my color palette, you can change that to whatever works for you. And of course, don't forget, August 6th through the 8th, Midweek Magic will be focused on Bloomburrow Constructed. So we'll be bringing 60 card decks made from only cards in Bloomburrow as a set. It's really funny to me how far we've come with Jump-In. I used to do periodic videos about one of the fatal flaws of Jump-In is that it didn't lead to decks, and now every season I do a video about how to build a deck exclusively from Jump-In offerings. So be sure to keep that in mind as you're doing your Jump-In, and of course tune in for that Midweek Magic coverage to get all the inside tips and tricks. And before we go, of course, I always want to thank my entire Patreon community for supporting not just my passion, but the community at large. And in particular, this time around, I wanted to recognize Searing Blaze and Kenny F. They are coming up on their 1-year anniversary of support. Thank you all. Thank you guys. I could not do this without you. And of course, let me leave you with some suggestions for your next step here on the channel.